The clatter of a mop bucket echoed down the marble hallway, but no one looked up. Elena Torres had become part of the background at the Baccarat Grand Hotel, efficient, invisible, and unspoken. Each day, she clocked in before sunrise, pushing her cart past glass chandeliers and velvet drapes, scrubbing away footprints from people who'd never know her name. To them, she was housekeeping, a whisper behind a do not disturb sign, but beneath the cleaning gloves and quiet eyes was a woman fluent in 4 languages, a former honors student from Hunter College, and a daughter who gave up everything when her mother fell ill. Each night, after folding the last towel, Elena boarded the subway to the Brooklyn Public Library, where she taught herself French under flickering fluorescent lights, grammar drills, podcasts, calls with an old professor from Paris. It was her secret rebellion, a way to believe she was more than the uniform she wore. Until one afternoon, a phone call in fluent French, a conversation she thought no one would hear, and a man in a navy suit, walking past with silent authority, who paused. That man was Gabriel Hart, the elusive billionaire owner of the Baccarat Grand. He didn't say a word. Not then, but the next day, everything changed. It was supposed to be her 10-minute break. Elena stood in the narrow alley behind the Baccarat Grand, the scent of freshly laundered linens clinging to her uniform. Her phone was wedged between shoulder and ear, and her words danced through the air. Not in English, not in Spanish, but in fluid, confident French. Oui, professeur, j'ai terminé la lecture de Camus, mais je crois que sa solitude est un miroir, pas une fuite. She laughed softly. It was the kind of laugh that hadn't surfaced in months, the sound of someone remembering who they used to be. On the other end, Dr. Lefebvre, her old professor from Hunter College, chuckled. You still speak like a poet, Elena. And your French is near flawless. Have you ever considered applying for international interpreter positions again? She hesitated. Yes, she said, but I clean hotel rooms now. It wasn't self-pity, it was fact. What Elena didn't see, what she couldn't have seen, was the man who had paused just beyond the corner, a man who had come outside for a private call only to hear a cleaner quoting Camus in perfect French. His eyes narrowed, not in suspicion, but in recognition. Gabriel Hart. He stood still, one hand in his pocket, the other holding a phone he no longer remembered to use. The cadence of her voice had caught him off guard. It wasn't just the language, it was the conviction in her tone, as if she'd carried intellect beneath silence for far too long. He didn't interrupt, didn't reveal himself. When she ended the call and tucked her phone away, he had already disappeared, slipping back into the glass and marble world where people like Elena never existed. That night, Elena returned to her studio apartment in Queens. She didn't know her life had been overheard, but Gabriel Hart didn't sleep. He spent the night replaying her voice in his mind, not for entertainment, but because it struck something he hadn't felt in years, curiosity, and something else he couldn't name yet. By dawn, he had already made a call to HR, a quiet order, a new position, no explanation. And by the time Elena Torres arrived the next morning, everything would be different. The morning started like any other. Elena Torres tied her hair back in a low bun, slipped on her housekeeper uniform, and boarded the 6:20 a.m. train to Manhattan with a thermos of lukewarm coffee and a dog-eared paperback in her bag. Her body moved on autopilot, swipe card, locker room, clean supply cart. Until halfway through her hallway assignment, her supervisor approached her with a look that made Elena freeze. "Elena," Rosa whispered, glancing nervously over her shoulder. "You need to go down to HR, now!" Elena's heart sank. Had she done something wrong? Broken protocol? She had triple-checked the minibar in 508. She was sure of it. Without a word, she pushed her cart to the service area and made her way down the narrow elevator usually reserved for staff. Inside the HR office, the mood was unnervingly polite. Mrs. Whitaker, the HR manager known for her strict tone, smiled as Elena entered. "Ms. Torres, please sit." Elena sat stiffly, palms clammy. Her voice came out thin. "Is something wrong?" "No," Mrs. Whitaker said, folding her hands. "You've been reassigned." Elena blinked. I don't understand." Mrs. Whitaker slid a sealed envelope across the desk. "Effective immediately. You're no longer with housekeeping. You'll report to Mr. Hart's executive suite after lunch. Your new role is titled International Guest Liaison Assistant. Training begins this afternoon." Elena stared at the words as if they were in another language. "Mr. Hart? The owner?" Mrs. Whitaker didn't blink. "Yes." Elena shook her head slowly. "But I didn't apply for anything. It wasn't an application," she said. "It was a direct request." "A request?" Mrs. Whitaker's lips thinned. "Let's just say Mr. Hart is very selective with who he notices." Elena left the office in a daze, clutching her uniform in one hand and a paper with new security clearance codes in the other. No one said a word as she walked past her old cleaning route. Rosa watched her from the end of the hallway, giving a small nod. Not surprised, just quietly proud. Elena changed in the staff locker room, slowly slipping into the tailored navy blouse that had been waiting for her in a garment bag. She looked at herself in the mirror. No apron, no name tag that said housekeeping. Just her reflection, framed by the same face but carrying the unfamiliar weight of possibility. Outside, the hotel bustled on, but upstairs someone had decided to see her differently, and that changed everything. Elena Torres stood outside the executive office on the 42nd floor, her heart pounding so loud it drowned out the ambient classical music playing faintly through the corridor. Her polished shoes, still too new, still stiff, felt out of place on the velvet carpet. She had passed this hallway hundreds of times as a cleaner, but today the air felt thicker, pressurized, like a different atmosphere. The assistant at the desk gave her a subtle nod. "Mr. Hart will see you now." The door opened with a soft whoosh. Elena stepped into the room. The first thing she noticed wasn't the panoramic view of Manhattan stretching endlessly behind the glass walls. It was him. Gabriel Hart stood near the window, one hand tucked into his pocket, the other holding a coffee cup with a small chip at the rim. He didn't look at her right away. "Elena Torres," he said slowly, still facing the skyline. "Yes, sir." A beat passed. Then he turned. Up close, Gabriel Hart looked exactly as he did in the rare photos online. Composed, distant, and devastatingly unreadable. His charcoal gray suit fit like it was stitched to his breath. But it was his eyes, sharp and quiet, as if cataloging everything without speaking. That caught her most off guard. "I heard you yesterday," he said. "French. Impeccable." Elena swallowed. "I was speaking with my former professor." Gabriel nodded once. "I assumed as much." He walked toward the long walnut desk and gestured for her to sit across from him. The leather chair sighed under her weight. "I have a meeting in 2 days," he continued. 3 investors from Lyon. They've refused to speak English in previous negotiations. My last liaison? Useless, no instinct. Elena said nothing. She didn't know if he expected an answer. "I created this role for you," Gabriel said plainly. "Not because I need another assistant. I have a dozen, but because I believe talent should not rot in the shadows." Elena's fingers gripped her knees. "I've never done this kind of work. Not at this level." He nodded. "Then this is your first." There was no fanfare, no charm, just certainty. Gabriel slid a file across the desk, thick, marked confidential. "Study this. Meet me at 6 a.m. tomorrow. We'll begin prep." And then, as abruptly as it started, the meeting ended. Elena stepped out of the office, heart still hammering. She didn't fully understand what had just happened. But one thing was clear. She had been seen, and now she had something to prove. The Baccarat Grand's rosewood ballroom shimmered under 1,000 crystal prisms. The long oval table gleamed under the chandelier's glow, every surface perfectly arranged, except the atmosphere. That was tense. Elena stood to the side, dressed, in a sleek navy sheath dress Gabriel had personally approved. Her ID badge now read, International Liaison, Guest Strategy Division. It still felt unreal. Across the table sat the delegation from Lyon, 3 stone-faced men in tailored gray suits. One of them, Monsieur Bellon, tapped his Mont Blanc pen against the table with calculated impatience. Gabriel Hart sat at the head of the table, inscrutable as ever. His silence wasn't fear. It was strategy. And right now, the strategy was failing. "They're stalling," whispered Angela, the VP of Finance, leaning toward Gabriel. "They want to pull out." Gabriel gave no reaction. He turned slightly, toward Elena. One nod. Her cue. Elena stepped forward. Every eye shifted. Inutile de continuer à parler en anglais. She began calmly. "There's no point in continuing in English, is there?" The Frenchmen blinked. One of them smirked. Balin sat up straighter. "Vous parlez français?" he asked, skeptical. "Je parle, je traduis, et je comprends les nuances," she said, voice steady. "I speak, I translate, and I understand nuance." Pause. Then Balin chuckled, the first sign of movement from him all day. "Alors parlons." "Then let's talk." What followed was a verbal chess match. Elena translated every sentence, yes, but more than that, she adjusted tone, softened, sharp phrasing, and restructured answers so they would land with respect, not arrogance. At one point, a cultural misstep nearly derailed the meeting. Gabriel's team had described the hotel expansion as a luxury invasion. Belland bristled. Elena stepped in smoothly. "Je pense que ce que Monsieur Hart veut dire," she said, looking him straight in the eye, "c'est une invitation au raffinement partagé, a shared refinement." The Frenchman smiled. Deal salvaged. By the end of the meeting, the mood had shifted dramatically. Hands were shaken. Laughter bubbled. Papers were signed. As the guests exited, Gabriel stood and walked toward Elena. Yumakoin turned a nosedive into a handshake, he said quietly. "I just listened," she replied, "and translated what was between the lines." He paused. "You did more than that." And then, for the first time since she'd met him, Gabriel Hart smiled. The 42nd floor of the Baccarat Grand wasn't listed on any hotel brochure. It wasn't part of the guest suites or executive lounges. It was where Gabriel Hart worked late into the night, an austere office with floor-to-ceiling glass windows and a single dim brass lamp that cast golden halos on polished mahogany. It was also where Elena now found herself more and more often. At first, she stayed only when needed, helping prep memos in French, drafting follow-ups to the Lyon deal. But soon, it became a quiet ritual. Her entering with tea in one hand and a thick binder in the other, Gabriel already at his desk, jacket draped over the back of his chair. He rarely looked up when she arrived. He didn't need to. Her presence was steady, unobtrusive. They worked in a rhythm. No small talk, no wasted time. But every silence between them was charged with something neither dared name yet. One evening, as the rain streaked the windows and the city blurred into shadows, Elena asked the question that had lived on the edge of her thoughts. "Why did you choose me, Mr. Hart? There are 100 interns with Ivy League accents and polished resumes." Gabriel looked up from his screen. His eyes, always guarded, softened for a moment. "I've read those resumes," he said. "They know how to perform. You know, how to endure." She blinked. "I saw you once," he continued, "months before the Dutch call. You were cleaning the mirrored hallway near the gallery level. A guest had knocked over a wine glass. You were on your knees, scrubbing quietly, while another staff member passed by pretending not to notice. You didn't speak. You just kept working." Elena looked down. Her fingers tightened around the mug. "I've built this place," Gabriel said, "on perfection. But I forgot something. Resilience isn't always loud. Sometimes it mops the floor and still dreams in another language." Silence fell between them again, but this time It was tender. Elena met his gaze. "And what about you?" she asked. "Do you still dream?" Gabriel hesitated, as if the question caught him off guard. "Not for a long time," he admitted. "But lately I've started remembering how." The city glimmered outside. Two people, from two worlds, sitting across a narrow desk, but suddenly, closer than ever. That night, when Elena returned to her studio in Queens, the hum of the train no longer felt like background noise. It felt like the beginning of something neither of them had dared hope for. The invitation came unexpectedly, tucked inside a crisp envelope, slid gently across Elena's desk at the end of a long Friday. It wasn't from HR, or formal like a memo. Just 4 words, handwritten in elegant ink. "Dinner. My place. Tonight." No signature. No time. But she knew. The cab ride to the Upper Hudson estate felt like a dream. Rain drizzled against the window, soft and rhythmic, as if the city itself were holding its breath. When she arrived, the driver slowed before a stone driveway lined with maple trees, their leaves flickering gold beneath the wet street lamps. Gabriel answered the door himself. No suit, just a navy sweater, sleeves rolled to the elbow, and jeans that made him look younger, more human. Behind him, the house was dimly lit, warm, lived in. Not the sterile kind she expected from a billionaire. There were books stacked on side tables, music playing faintly from a vintage record player, and the scent of something rustic simmering from the kitchen. "Elena," he said, his voice gentler than usual. "Come in. I hope you're hungry." Dinner was mushroom risotto and roasted sea bass, cooked by Gabriel himself. They ate by the fireplace, no staff, no protocol, just 2 people sharing bread, wine, and fragments of their stories. She told him about her mother's long illness, about the scholarship she almost had, about the nights she'd cry into her French grammar books and whisper, "Un jour, ça changera." He listened, really listened, the way no one ever had. And then, as the rain picked up and the flames crackled, softly Gabriel leaned forward. His expression was unguarded, raw even. "Elena," he said quietly, "somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing you as someone I admire, and started seeing you as someone I don't want to imagine life without." The room stilled. Elena's breath caught. She'd braced for admiration, even desire. But not this. Not a confession wrapped in vulnerability, so deliberate, so disarming. She looked at him. Not the billionaire, not the boss, but the man who had once cleaned hotel floors himself, and still carried the scars of loneliness behind glass walls and boardrooms. "I didn't ask for this," she said, her voice trembling. "I didn't come here looking for anything." "I know," Gabriel replied. "That's why it's real." She didn't speak. Instead, she reached out, one slow, certain movement, and placed her hand in his. Outside, the rain kept falling. But inside that room, a wall had finally come down. In the weeks that followed, Elena's world shifted, quietly, irrevocably. The marble floors she once mopped now echoed beneath her heels as she stepped into strategy briefings, translation sessions, and cross-continental calls. Her title had changed, international liaison, but no one knew just how close she was to the man behind every deal. Gabriel never touched her at work, never called her by her first name in meetings, never gave her so much as a glance longer than necessary. But in private, everything was different. After hours, they'd meet in the old archives room 3 floors below the lobby, long forgotten by most staff, except for a few senior managers who used it to store antique ledgers. Elena had found it once by accident. Now it was their hidden corner of the world. There, among dusty record books and iron lamps, they'd drink espresso from paper cups and whisper plans in 3 languages. She helped him navigate the nuances of a luxury merger in Marseille. He gave her full access to the Paris proposal, an expansion project that could redefine their entire brand in Europe. "You see things others miss," he told her one night, placing a dossier in her hands. "Not just languages, people. But secrecy wasn't easy. Rumors began to swirl among upper staff about the girl from Queens who now held Gabriel's ear. Some whispered she was a rising star. Others said she was just lucky. A few muttered darker things, suggesting favors exchanged behind closed doors. Alina kept her head down. She refused to be baited, but one night, after a long negotiation session, she found a note slipped into her office drawer. Some people know how to stay in their place. Maybe you should learn. No name. Just spite. She showed it to Gabriel, quietly, while they sat in his townhouse kitchen over late-night tea. He read it, crumpled it, and dropped it into the sink. Then, in the silence that followed, he simply said, "They can't reach you, Alina, not where you're going." She wanted to believe him, but deep down she knew. Success was only part of the battle. Belonging was the war. What they had, this bond, was still fragile, still hidden, but it was also real. And as the Paris launch approached, so did a moment that would test not only Alina's professional strength, but their personal loyalty. In just a few days, the world would watch, and Alina Torres would have to prove she belonged, not just by his side, but on her own terms. Paris shimmered under the spring sun, the Seine glowing like a ribbon of light beneath the balconies of the Hôtel du Ciel. Gabriel's newest acquisition and his boldest move yet. And at the center of its grand opening stood Alina Torres, no longer just the girl from housekeeping, but the woman orchestrating an international alliance between 5 European brands. She had barely slept. For days, she coordinated back-to-back meetings, press interviews, multilingual negotiations, and cultural briefings. Her French was flawless, her strategy airtight, yet beneath the poise, her heart thrummed with a single question. Was she just a shadow beside a powerful man, or had she finally stepped into her own light? The press watched. Executives whispered. Some greeted her in French, others in English. A few still looked past her, seeing only what they wanted. A pretty assistant in a nice dress. Gabriel, ever composed, stood beside her like granite. Still formal, still distant, until the final moment. They gathered in the marble atrium for the announcement. The international press, hotel partners, and global investors. Cameras rolled as Gabriel Hart took the podium, his tone steady, his expression unreadable. "We often talk about innovation, luxury, and legacy in this industry," he began, "but we rarely talk about the people who make those things possible. Not the ones with the loudest voices, but the ones who listen first, who understand before they speak." He paused, his gaze scanning the room. "Today I'd like to introduce the person behind this entire expansion, someone whose intelligence, empathy, and resilience changed not just how I run my business, but how I see the world." Whispers rippled through the crowd. Alina froze. Gabriel turned, extended a hand, and said the words that made the world stop. "This is Alina Torres, our new Director of Global Strategy, and the woman I am proud to call my partner, in business and in life." A silence fell. Then a cascade of camera clicks. Alina didn't move at first. Then slowly she stepped forward, took his hand, and faced the crowd. Not with fear, but with clarity. Not with apology, but with earned presence. They didn't just see her as Gabriel Hart's mystery woman anymore. They saw her as a force. And in that moment, under Parisian light and the weight of 100 gazes, Alina Torres finally stopped doubting whether she belonged, because she had arrived, fully, unmistakably, and entirely as herself. By the next morning, Alina's name was everywhere. From cleaner to CEO's muse, who is Alina Torres? Sleeping her way up, or strategic genius? Gabriel Hart breaks silence, and the internet with shocking Paris reveal. Her inbox exploded with media requests, LinkedIn pings from strangers, and veiled messages dripping with fake praise. Some celebrated her rise. Others dismissed it as scandal. On the screen her face was frozen mid-smile. Dissected, zoomed in, speculated on. At first, she stared at it blankly from the hotel suite's balcony, a robe wrapped tightly around her, the Eiffel Tower watching like an old witness. Gabriel sat across the room, phone in hand, silent. "They don't care about what I've done," she finally said. "Just how I got here." He stood, walked over, and gently placed his phone down. "Elena, you don't owe anyone a performance. Let them talk. The truth is louder." She turned to face him. "But I do care, because there's a girl out there right now, mopping a hallway, who thinks this world doesn't see her. If I disappear now, I'll be proving them right." Gabriel nodded slowly. "So what are you going to do?" She picked up her laptop, opened a blank document, and began typing. That night, Elena posted a letter on her personal account. No PR filters, no corporate polish. Just her voice. "6 months ago, I was mopping the marble floor outside the Baccarat Grand Penthouse. No one asked my name. No one looked twice. I spoke 4 languages and held a degree with honors, but wore a uniform that made me invisible. I didn't fall in love with power. I fell in love with someone who listened, who noticed what no one else did, and who gave me the one thing I fought hardest for, a chance. To those who doubt me, thank you. You reminded me why I'll never stop proving that talent doesn't have a uniform." Within hours, the post went viral. Celebrities, scholars, working-class women, even diplomats shared her words. The hashtag #talent has no uniform trended across platforms. Gabriel, watching the ripple effect, said nothing, just stood behind her quietly, the same way he had from the beginning, and for the first time, Elena realized it wasn't just a story about love or success or proving herself. It was about reframing what visibility meant and owning her place in a world that tried to write her out. 6 months later, the Baccarat Grand Paris shimmered under the winter sun. Inside its newest conference wing, designed by a team Elena personally mentored, a plaque was unveiled. Elena Torres International Fellowship for Women in Hospitality and Language. Elena stood before the crowd, not as a guest, not even just as Gabriel Hart's partner, but as the director of global strategy, the woman behind the hotel's fastest international expansion in history. Flashes popped. Reporters leaned forward. Young interns in the back watched with wide eyes, the same way Elena once watched others from behind a mop bucket. She took the mic. Her voice was steady, resonant. People once asked how a hotel cleaner ended up here. The real question is, why did it take so long for someone like her to be seen? I didn't just clean rooms, I listened. I studied. I stayed late when no one was watching. Not to impress anyone, but because deep down I knew I belonged somewhere bigger. The room was silent, not out of obligation, but awe. She continued, "This fellowship isn't just a scholarship, it's a spotlight. For every woman who speaks a different language, who hides her brilliance behind silence, who works in the shadows, it's your turn." At the back of the room, Gabriel stood quietly, his eyes never leaving her. When the ceremony ended, he approached, holding her coat like he always did. "They're saying the next Forbes cover is yours," he said softly. Elena smiled. "They can have the cover. I'm building the table." That night, as they walked the quiet streets of Paris hand in hand, snow beginning to fall, Elena paused in front of a bakery, the warm scent of butter and sugar wafting through the window. "I used to pass by here after shifts," she said. "Could never afford anything." Gabriel didn't respond. He just opened the door. Inside, he ordered 2 of everything, then handed them all to her in a velvet-lined box. "For every night you starved your dreams," he said. They sat on a bench, sharing eclairs and laughing under the Parisian moonlight. Not cleaner and billionaire, not employee and boss, just Elena and Gabriel, 2 souls who had once been invisible, now standing side by side, rewriting what success looks like, with grace, grit, and a quiet kind of glory. Dear viewers, what lessons did you take away from this dramatic tale? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed the story, give us a thumbs up, share it with friends, and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss out on our latest updates. Thanks for watching and stay blessed.